Hello and welcome to another episode of Road and Race. If you're following along with my BMW 5 Series repair series, you may know that in the last video I posted a 2-year update and everything was peachy. I'd had the car for 2 years, I'd done a few kind of proactive maintenance repairs and things like that, but essentially I'd run the car for 2 years and it'd been absolutely fine, very, very reliable. Until now. I was underneath the car and I noticed a small leak coming from the under tray. So I took the under tray off and there was a lot more oil, and so I traced it up and it seems like all the oil was coming from the turbo. Now this is problematic because the turbo is a fairly expensive piece of kit. You know, you're looking at about £1,000 for a new one. And worst of all, it's buried right in the middle of the engine bay, so it takes a long time to take everything off to get to it. Now, the car has done 140,000 miles, and you know, the turbo, especially on the diesels, can fail around this time. You know, there's quite a lot of dirty exhaust fumes going through the turbo because obviously of the EGR valve and things like that. So it's not unexpected, it's just disappointing that I thought the car was essentially going to run problem-free. Now, whilst BMW probably charge over £2,000 for a new turbo and the repair, I've done a bit of research online and you can get rebuild kits for this turbo for about £160. Then when you factor in a few new gaskets and hoses and stuff like that, you're bringing the bill up to about £200, which, you know, seems fairly reasonable. It's just the amount of time it takes to take the whole engine apart and exhaust off and everything to get to the turbo. So I've done all that work, so let me show you what's involved with kind of removing the turbo from this car. Here we are then. So I've had to take a fair amount of stuff out of the engine bay. You can see the whole top of the engine's had to come off to get access because, I'll grab a light. The turbo is connected to this big DPF down here. And so I've taken basically the top of the engine apart. You can see everything I've had to remove on the floor here. So that's the intake manifold, all the tubing, air intake, injectors, top of the engine, exhaust, manifold cover. Then from the bottom of the engine, you have to take, you know, under tray off, turbo charger pipe. I took the exhaust manifold off. And then also you have to take the exhaust off, all the under tray, all the metal bracing. Yeah, it's a fairly long exhaust as well. So, you know, to take that off really does need 2 people. Now, you don't necessarily need to take as much of the top of the engine off as I did. But it just makes your life so much easier. This DPF here is enormous and chunky, and it doesn't pass the steering rack very easily, or doesn't at all. You have to take the steering rack off. And so rather than fiddle about the steering rack, I took basically the top of the engine off because I thought it would just be simpler. It gives me a chance to renew a few seals. So the seals that are on the top of the head here, I'll get all those replaced. Just stops another oil leak potentially from happening in the future. So here is the troublesome beast, the Garrett turbo. It's actually a fairly straightforward rebuild process. You just unscrew it. Let me just show you. Put this over here. So it comes apart. That's the top of it there. And this is the cartridge. This is the inside of it. The 2 housings. And that's the external housing. So what actually I believe has failed is the cartridge part of it here, you see. So £160, you can buy a shiny new cartridge. And that basically just fits in the middle here. Had to buy a few additional bits and bobs, new oil intake hose, some more screws, gaskets, seals. That's the head seal I talked about earlier. Some silicone, high temperature grease for reassembling it all. But doesn't seem too unachievable. I'm just going to pop that in there, replacing this, and tighten it all up again. It took me about a day to get the turbo out of the car, but if I had to do it again, it'd probably take me less time. It's always difficult the first time, like getting all the clips undone and some little niggles with the car, but it wasn't too bad, you know, especially if you've got a garage, you can just sit down and get on with it, so to speak. So just got to get this turbo put back together again, then back in the car, and then putting it back together. But hopefully that won't be too bad. And I'll give you an update in a future video how that was. So, as usual, thanks for watching.